E já estamos ao vivo novamente, aqui acompanhando agora o retorno da CREW-6. Deixa eu só ajeitar aqui o nosso cronômetro, nossa legenda aqui, né? Então, aqui CREW-6 Splash. Então aí pronto, ajeitado aqui. Então já estamos ao vivo, meia-noite no horário de Brasília. Estamos novamente ao vivo para acompanharmos então o retorno da Dragon Endeavour, que ficou então a bordo 6 meses na Estação Espacial Internacional. Estamos também ao vivo em conjunto com a NASA e a Spacex, né, para então acompanharmos este grande momento aí do retorno após 6 meses aí da tripulação da Dragon Endeavour. Né, então vamos acompanhar o momento do retorno e o Splashdown aí da tripulação da CREW-6, né, do Stephen Bowen, Warren Hoburg, né, o nosso querido Wood, Sultan Alneyadi, dos Emirados Árabes Unidos, e do Andrey Fedyaev, da Rússia. Nós estamos então ao vivo novamente, lembrando que foi alterado então o horário do Splashdown, né, aí programado agora para os 17 minutos, então no horário de Brasília. Estamos aí ao vivo. Dois minutos pelo horário de Brasília. Hoje, então, 4 de setembro de 2023, segunda-feira, aqui no horário de Brasília, né? Estamos aí ao vivo no Centro de Controle na Califórnia, nos Estados Unidos, da SpaceX. Então aí a tripulação, né, que está a bordo da CREW-6, né, da Endeavour. Estamos então acompanhando neste momento o retorno então da Dragon Endeavour com o Splashdown. Lembrando que ontem na parte então da manhã, né, nós acompanhamos então o undocking, né, então temos imagens aí do que aconteceu na parte da manhã, né, com o undocking, né, da CREW-6 Endeavour. Isso aí aconteceu ontem de manhã, no dia 3 de setembro, né, e após então 17 horas de descida de órbita, né, estamos aí, então eles estão começando então a fazer o procedimento de retorno à Terra.
And from there, the spacecraft will use its forward thrusters to perform a deorbit burn, which will put Dragon on a trajectory to return to Earth. This burn will last 16 minutes once it starts.
3 minutos no horário de Brasília, estamos então acompanhando ao vivo aí para o Brasil e para o mundo, aí, então a reentrada da Dragon Endeavour. Então lembrando que aí é o ponto onde mais ou menos a Dragon então vai fazer o Splashdown na Flórida, aí, então não ali no Golfo do México, né, um pouco depois e na outra ponta, é um pouco acima então ali do Cabo Canaveral, é um pouco mais ao norte.
Bowen is also a veteran of 3 previous NASA
Estamos aí ao
flights,
vivo,
including space shuttle flights on STS-126, 132, and 133. During those missions, he and his crew expanded the living quarters on the International Space Station, delivered
Então
an
acompanhamos
integrated
ainda há
cargo
pouco, né?
carrier
Agora há
and a
pouco,
Russian mini research
a
module.
transmissão então da
With this
missão
mission, he
Starlink
now has logged
foi realizada então
227
com
days of space,
sucesso
including 65
aí
hours
então
and 57 minutes
no Centro
in
Espacial
10
Kennedy.
spacewalks.
Então temos aí o
Today,
nosso
he's the
comandante, o
commander of
Stephen
CREW-6.
Bowen,
Sitting
que
next
está
to
começando.
In Spacex, preemptively, we are 11 minutes out from deorbit sequence start and expect to be LOS during CLOSEP prep.
Expect to be LOS during CLOSEP prep.
All right, those comms from SpaceX Core to Dragon Endeavour.
Então
Just
temos
letting
aí o
the
nosso
crew know that we
piloto,
will have a
o
loss of signal,
Warren
while
Hoburg,
we are
né,
performing
astronauta
the
da
claw
NASA.
separation, which we mentioned that earlier is one of the steps for deorbit, but that deorbit burn coming up soon. Now, getting back to the crew on board, sitting next to Stephen is pilot Warren Woody Hoburg.
Temos aí o nosso
The
Warren Hoburg,
37-year-old is from Pittsburgh,
é o
Pennsylvania.
nosso
He
piloto
studied
da
aeronautics and
astronauta da
astronautics
NASA.
from MIT before getting a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from University of California, Berkeley.
Então estão
During grad
retornando à
school,
Terra
Hoburg
após
worked as an
6
EMT
meses
with the
em
Yosemite
órbita na
Search and
Estação
Rescue.
Espacial
CREW-6 has been
Internacional.
Hoburg's first flight since NASA selected him to be an astronaut in 2017. He is also a commercial pilot with
Lembrando que o Splashdown então está programado para acontecer à meia-noite 17 no horário de Brasília, perto então da costa da Flórida, nos Estados Unidos.
He served as an Expedition 68 and 69 flight engineer and is coming home with 186 days in space and 11 hours, 38 minutes of time outside the hatch on 2 spacewalks.
In the role of mission specialist is astronaut Sultan
Nosso primeiro
Alneyadi.
especialista
He
da
was
missão,
chosen by
né,
the
é o
Mohammed bin
Sultan
Rashid Space Center at the
Alneyadi,
United
aí
Arab
da
Emirates to be a part of Expedition
dos
68 and 69.
Emirados
Father of five spent
Árabes
most of his
Unidos.
life in Al Ain and Abu Dhabi,
Nosso
but in
primeiro
2020
especialista
traded that in
da
for
missão.
astronaut training in Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center. This has been his first trip to space, so he also now has 186 days in orbit. Additionally, he went on one spacewalk totaling 7 hours and 1 minute.
It was also the first trip to space
E é nosso segundo
for the second
especialista
mission
da
specialist,
missão,
was
da
Cosmonauts
Rússia,
Andrey
o
Fedyaev.
cosmonauta
Andrey was selected
Andrey
as a
Fedyaev.
cosmonaut back in 2012. He will monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic re-entry phase of
Então eles
flight.
estão iniciando
While on
agora o
board
seu
station, he
procedimento
served
aí
as a
de
flight
retorno
engineer for Expeditions
à Terra.
68 and 69, and
Faltando
returns
aí
today
10 minutos
also
para o
with
Splashdown.
180 days in space. Now, to prepare for
Lembrando
upcoming
que agora há
events, the
pouco
Dragon
então
spacecraft
tivemos,
is currently doing a couple of
acompanhamos
things
ao vivo aí
autonomously.
a
It's isolating
missão
the
Starlink.
thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator.
Foi realizada
This
então
system is
no
what
Centro
will help
Espacial
keep the
Kennedy, nos
internal
Estados
temperature
Unidos,
of Dragon,
na plataforma
very temperate
39A
for
com
Stephen,
21
Woody,
satélites.
Sultan, and Andrei
E agora
during,
vamos
the
acompanhar então
re-entry
o retorno
phase.
da tripulação da
Dragon is also
CREW-6
initiating separation
com o
of the
retorno
claw
e o
mechanism, which will
Splashdown.
terminate data, power, and fluid connections between the capsule and
Para quem não sabe o que é o Splashdown, né, é o famoso toque na água, né, onde eles vão aí fazer a reentrada e eles vão fazer o toque na água, fazendo então aí seu pouso, né, com auxílio então de paraquedas. Estamos aí então aguardando a separação então da parte de trás da nave Dragon, né, que é a parte então como se fosse o porta-malas aí da Dragon.
We'll see a couple of things in rapid succession at that point, really at the time of the deorbit
Vocês
burn.
podem ver ali na
That's that
animação, né?
16-minute
Então
burn
estamos
we were
aguardando
discussing
esta
before, and
separação,
that is the
então,
retrograde
pela
firing
parte de
primarily
trás
of those
da
forward
nave
bulkhead
Dragon,
thrusters
né? Como
that
se
slow
fosse
the spacecraft down
aí o
significantly,
porta-malas,
not quite
né,
so
da
significantly
da
as
nave.
entry, but enough to really make contact with some of the upper limits of the atmosphere and start with the drag and plasma buildup that gets the spacecraft from
E aí só vai ficar então com a parte da cápsula da Dragon.
After it passes through the atmosphere, and that's about a 7-minute period. We'll have a loss of signal at that time. It's a
E aí durante a reentrada, né, vamos ficar aí com a perda de sinal aí por mais ou menos aí em torno de 7 minutos, né, devido à alta temperatura, né, que ocorre durante este procedimento então de reentrada da cápsula Dragon, né, devido ao plasma, né. Então aí temos aí imagens ao vivo então aí da tripulação da CREW-6 dentro da Dragon.
Getting some views from inside the cabin now. This is fantastic. So we get
E
these
temos as
views
imagens
pass
então
over
da
some of the ground
tripulação
stations
dentro da
here
cápsula
on Earth
Dragon.
that provide the video straight from the Dragon capsule. So on the far left there is Andrey Fedyaev, and in the seat next to him, to his right is the commander, Steve Bowen. To his right is the pilot, Woody Hoburg. And then on the far side of the capsule from this view that you're seeing is Emirati astronaut Sultan Alneyadi. You can see they're in their launch and re-entry suits, and they entered that even before our coverage started and performed a successful leak check. So really, they're just waiting.
Então lembrando mais uma vez aí para vocês deixarem aí seu like na transmissão, também aí a sua inscrição no nosso canal. Lembrando que também a gente acompanha aqui também ao vivo as caminhadas espaciais, tanto do lado russo quanto do lado americano. 10 minutos no horário de Brasília. Estamos então aí ao vivo dentro da cápsula Dragon.
Been through this 3 times before. This is its fourth space flight.
E lembrando também, né, quem fez aí então a prova da UERJ, que aconteceu ontem, né, domingo dia 3 de setembro, né, tem aí a nossa correção da minha versão, né, da correção da parte de matemática, né, já que eu sou aí professor de matemática, né, e para você não perder nenhum detalhe que acontece nas transmissões, né, siga a gente nas redes sociais aí no antigo Twitter, né, o X, e também lá no Instagram. Estamos aguardando então a separação da parte de trás da nave Dragon, né, que é aquela, se fosse porta-malas, né, entre aspas, né. Estamos aí com imagens de dentro da Dragon. Lembrando que o Splashdown então está programado para acontecer entre meia-noite e 17, meia-noite e 25 no horário de Brasília. Beleza, meu amigo Walter, seja bem-vindo novamente aí, né? Estamos aí ao vivo novamente. Né? Aqui é assim, a gente vai fazendo troca de um lado para outra, né? É uma loucura. Eu entendi que é uma loucura. Mas é assim mesmo a nossa transmissão. Vamos lá. Nós estamos aqui então firme e fortes aí.
For sure. They also go through extensive training, so even though this is the first time that they have performed this splashdown in real time for this particular crew, they have worked.
Então, lembrando que quando a Dragon então, né, começar a fazer o seu procedimento de reentrada, devido então à alta temperatura que acontece então pelo arrasto na atmosfera, né, pelo plasma, de alto calor, né, vamos ficar aí com a perda de sinal para a Dragon por em torno aí de 7 minutos. Então aí já está previsto aí para acontecer o Splashdown, já mudou o horário então para meia-noite e 25 no horário de Brasília. Anteriormente estava previsto para acontecer a meia-noite e 17, mas será aí em torno de meia-noite e 25 e meia-noite e meia. Aí o toque na água.
Bring it onto the Dragon nest. It'll be the side hatch that they'll open to get the crew out.
Once again, we're standing by for claw separation.
Estamos então no aguardo aí da separação então da parte de trás da Dragon.
That claw separation is what allows for the trunk, the cylindrical, unpressurized section of the spacecraft, to separate and thereby revealing the heat shield,
Que aí
which is
depois aí
located
dessa separação aí que vai acontecer então o procedimento já de reentrada da parte então da cápsula da Dragon, de fato.
Pressurized section, the service section there, that trunk will separate, reveal the heat shield, and that heat shield is what will be pointing first, if you will, toward planet Earth as the capsule makes its atmospheric re-entry.
So again, we're targeting a splashdown off the coast of Florida. The prime landing target for today is off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida on the Atlantic coast. That splashdown time is 9:17 p.m. Pacific time, 12:17 a.m. September 4th Eastern time. So just
lembrando que o splashdown então vai acontecer na parte então do Atlântico, ali no Oceano Atlântico, né, na costa da Flórida, no Oceano Atlântico, não no Golfo do México, como normalmente acontece.
On a southeastern track heading towards the western coast of Australia. So just in the matter of an hour, they'll cover really the distance
15 minutos no horário
halfway.
de Brasília. Estamos já no dia, na segunda-feira. Então tá aí o diagrama, né, do mapa, onde então vai acontecer o splashdown, né, no lado do Oceano Atlântico, na costa da Flórida, nos Estados Unidos. Então lembrando que a reentrada deve acontecer ali mais ou menos próximo, ali um pouco da região da costa sul, ali da região do México, né, pelo lado do Pacífico, como vocês estão vendo ali no diagrama.
So if you're still up at midnight watching our coverage and you're in central and northern Florida, be sure to head out, see if you can see, depending on the weather there, see if you can see the plasma trail as CREW-6 re-enters the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the benefits to a nighttime splashdown. You can still see it during the day, but it is certainly much more striking whenever it's, streaking through the night sky. We've actually had a few nighttime
16 minutos pelo horário de Brasília. Estamos aí ao vivo, então acompanhando todo esse procedimento de reentrada e o splashdown então da tripulação CREW-6.
Spacex, we're back with you. Deorbit sequence start.
Então nesse momento foi dado a autorização para iniciarmos a sequência de descida de órbita.
So that deorbit sequence starts with what's called claw-sep prep, claw separation preparation.
E com isso então vamos ver aí, vamos então ter a separação então da parte de trás da Dragon. Com esse procedimento então já autorizado aí pela Spacex.
So again, we're still in claw-sep prep.
Estamos aguardando.
Once again, the crew will continue to monitor progress of events using the tablets and touchscreens that they have available to them.
Estamos então aguardando então aí a liberação então da parte de trás da Dragon. Lembrando então que o splashdown vai acontecer aí na parte do Oceano Atlântico, ali perto da costa da Flórida.
Live view there of mission control here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California.
18 minutos no horário de Brasília. Estamos aí acompanhando ao vivo então aí os procedimentos então no início da reentrada da cápsula Dragon, né, com a separação então da parte de trás da Dragon.
Yeah, lots of activity here. Again, as a reminder, we are in the deorbit sequence, which begins with the claw separation. This demates the umbilical to the trunk, which has solar panels and have been collecting some of the energy from the sun and providing it to the
naquela parte de trás onde fica ali como se fosse o porta-malas, entre aspas, ali da Dragon, né? Então onde fica ali toda a parte do sistema de pressurização e também ali dos painéis solares
And the
também.
pyros fired for the claw separation. Claw separation is complete. We're now preparing
Então, nesse
for trunk
momento,
separation.
está
Again, it's just a
confirmada
matter
a
of seconds
separação
before we
da
confirm
parte de
that the
trás,
trunk is
então,
separated.
da Dragon. Confirmada, então, aí a separação.
Once again, since that claw is now separated, we're able to separate the trunk. That claw is where the umbilicals for power and telemetry were connecting between the Dragon
Então,
capsule.
lembrando
and the
que o
trunk.
Splashdown, então, está mais ou menos previsto para
Pyros
acontecer
fired
aí
for
já
that
em
trunk separation.
Dragon SpaceX, nominal trunk jettison.
Copy, nominal trunk jettison.
Então, o Splashdown aí está
Alright,
programado,
so,
então,
yeah,
para
we had
acontecer
a
entre
good trunk separation that starts about a 5-minute
25
clock
minutos
until
e
we begin
30 minutos
that
no horário de
deorbit
Brasília.
burn. So that means telemetry is looking good. The nitrox system is
Então, estamos
primed
aí
for
indo bem
cabin
até o
and suit
momento.
cooling, and the heat shield is now
Sempre
exposed
vamos
and ready
atualizar
for
os horários para
atmospheric
vocês,
reentry.
né?
The
Lembrando que
trunk
agora,
served its purpose by
assim que
gathering
começar o
energy from the sun
procedimento de
through the solar rays and
reentrada,
converting that
né,
into
de
battery
fato,
power. Since we separated
né,
the
nós
trunk,
vamos
we
ter
can't
aí um
generate
blackout
any
de
more new
comunicação
power,
aí
but we
por
don't
mais ou menos
need
em
to
torno de
since we're
7
coming home.
minutos.
Dragon has enough battery power stored already.
Up next, we have the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to reentry.
Então, nesse momento,
The
vamos
slew or
ter
maneuver
então mais
to
esse momento de
deorbit
descida
burn
de órbita,
attitude and the deorbit burn itself.
né? Que
This
aí
is the
é o
last
momento
time
então
that the
de
forward
fato do
Dracos,
início do
which are the
procedimento
forward
de
thrusters
reentrada.
located on top of the spacecraft, under the nose cone, they will ignite. The deorbit burn will
Então,
place
mais uma vez
Dragon
aí,
in
imagens
precise
da
trajectory
Dragon
to the
Endeavour com a
splashdown
tripulação da
zone off the coast of
CREW-6.
Florida, and will last about 16 minutes once it starts, and it looks like we're just under 3.5 minutes away from that deorbit burn initiation.
We did confirm that slewing has started. So again, Dragon positions itself sort of off to the side to jettison the trunk so it doesn't have risk of recontact with the spacecraft and successfully burns up in the atmosphere. So it slews or reorients itself to make sure that those forward bulkhead Dracos are pointed in the right direction. We want a retrograde firing to really slow us down. So retrograde meaning the Draco thrusters fire in the direction that the Dragon is traveling in. So the nose is sort of pointed forward if you were to think of it as traveling along that axis.
It's almost like the brakes, like when you're driving a car.
Essentially. And this is a long burn. This is a 16-minute burn. So once it starts, we're going to stand by and just make sure and follow along and just make sure that has a good performance. That really sets them up to and decreases their velocity just enough so it loses some altitude and starts to make contact with the atmosphere. That slowing down, really all that does is just reduce the altitude, so it doesn't really slow it down too much. We're still hanging around 17,000
Estamos então aguardando o início da reentrada da Dragon.
That does the bulk of the braking. It's the friction against the atmosphere and that plasma buildup. We go from
Lembrando que a reentrada então deve acontecer ali mais ou menos próximo ali a costa do México, costa sul ali do México, né? Como vocês estão vendo ali no mapa deles lá dentro da nave. Estamos vendo ali a parte então da queima dos motores, né?
The initiation of that deorbit burn.
Right, again, we are in the deorbit sequence, which begins with that claw separation and trunk separation, both of which were successful. So now we're in what's called the deorbit prep.
Lembrando que assim então quando começar a reentrada da Dragon, nós vamos então aí ter a perda de comunicação por mais ou menos em torno de 7 minutos. Devido então ao alto calor então do plasma da reentrada na Terra, da atmosfera.
And we're less than a minute away from deorbit burn. Once again, this is the last time that those forward Dracos will be utilized.
Então quem ainda não se inscreveu no canal, né, deixa aí a sua inscrição e deixa o like também na transmissão, né, lembrando que cada like e cada inscrição ajuda bastante aí para aumentar aí o engajamento no canal.
We will be using the side hatch, which is actually outlined by that black liner kind of near the feet of the crew here in this view. That side hatch is what will be utilized for crew egress or exit from the capsule in just under an hour from now. Once again, we're targeting 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time for splashdown.
And we are getting lucky with some of these internal cabin views as we prepare for that deorbit burn start. This will be the last time that the crew is in an orbital daytime. They're currently over the South Indian Ocean, just west off the coast of Australia. And again, their trajectory takes them south around Australia and then on a northeastern trajectory over the Pacific Ocean. The deorbit, the entry interface, the time that it actually has that plasma buildup as it's slowing down significantly through the atmosphere. That will happen, and you may be able to see it depending on where you are, depending on the weather and cloud coverage, but that track brings it over the southern Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula. We do have deorbit burn start. You can see it on their displays, actually. You can see those thruster firings on the left display there.
Atualizando então o horário então do Splashdown, então eles atualizaram aí para 1h e não lembro qual foi o horário que eles atualizaram.
So a quick recap, within the last 10 minutes, Dragon jettisoned its trunk and initiated the
Vamos aguardar então novas atualizações, né? Mas a princípio acho que é 1h17 no horário de Brasília.
To establish a safety zone to ensure public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations,
então o horário
as well as the crew on board
do
the returning spacecraft. Multiple notices
do Splashdown então está programado então para agora 1h17.
Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. We want to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases the risk to the astronauts in the capsule, the teams
Então, após 6 meses em órbita, né, na Estação Espacial Internacional, então a tripulação da CREW-6, a Dragon Endeavour, né, então retorna à Terra.
The only exception to that, of course, is if you live in Central Florida and
Vamos ver aqui quando é que eles foram
through the window or head out into your front or backyard, you should definitely be able to witness
para o espaço,
streaking
né,
across
quando
the night
iniciou
sky. It'll
então
be
esta
super
missão.
bright.
Absolutely.
Now, like I mentioned earlier,
Vamos relembrar aqui, né? Deixa eu só pegar aqui as minhas anotações.
Endeavour has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on that final trajectory to the landing site, which, as we just said, is off the coast of Florida, near Jacksonville. Right now, as you can see on your screen, Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey continue to use their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco thruster firings, and trajectory details like the entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance remaining until deorbit burn termination. Right now, Dragon is flying itself, so all the crew has to do is
então, de acordo com as minhas anotações, né, a Dragon Endeavour da tripulação da CREW-6, né, teve o lançamento feito no dia 2 de março de 2023 e a sua acoplagem aconteceu no dia 3 de março de 2023 e agora o seu retorno aí sendo feito aí no dia 4 de setembro de 2023. Então, aproximadamente aí 6 meses em órbita, né?
Yesterday, NASA and SpaceX jointly selected the primary splashdown location of Jacksonville, Florida. This selection process works with a lot of
Então, lembrando que o Splashdown vai ser em torno na região de Jacksonville Field, ali na costa da Flórida, na parte então do Oceano Atlântico.
For the trip home and the sleep schedule for the returning crew members.
We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for
Então, o horário do
re-entry.
Splashdown aí, programado então para 1h17 minutos no horário de Brasília. Estamos nesse momento fazendo então o procedimento de descida de órbita, né, se preparando então para a reentrada. 29 minutos. No horário de Brasília, estamos acompanhando então o momento do retorno da tripulação da CREW-6, né, que teve aí a sua missão, né, que iniciou no dia 2 de março, né, com o lançamento da Dragon no Centro Espacial Kennedy, na Flórida, né, e retornando hoje no dia 4 de setembro de 2023. Então, aí 6 meses depois.
For the CREW-6 return, we looked at a number of weather items. Some of the obvious ones are no rain or chance of lightning in the recovery zone, both for the safety of the crew inside the capsule and the recovery teams on the water. We're also looking for
então, a tripulação que está retornando então da CREW-6 da Dragon Endeavour são eles, né, o Stephen Bowen, nosso comandante, o Warren Hoburg, nosso piloto, que são os dois que estão vendo aí na tela agora, né, que são os dois astronautas da NASA, o nosso primeiro especialista dos Emirados Árabes Unidos, o Sultan Alneyadi, e o nosso segundo especialista da missão da Rússia, o cosmonauta Andrey Fedyaev. Ele está fazendo agora então o seu caminho de volta para a Terra. Ainda estamos ainda fazendo o procedimento de descida de órbita. É verdade, né? 6 meses passaram voando. 31 minutos no horário de Brasília, ainda estamos ainda no procedimento de descida de órbita. Lembrando que a reentrada então deve começar dentro de instantes, ali na região então da costa sul do México, pelo lado do Pacífico. Lembrando então que o Splashdown está programado para acontecer a 1h17 da manhã no horário de Brasília, ali então na costa da Flórida, em Jacksonville, né, no lado Atlântico, no lado do Oceano Atlântico. E durante então o período de reentrada, né, nós teremos aí uma perda de comunicação, né, já esperada, devido à alta temperatura, né, onde tem esta reentrada aí devido à alta temperatura, devido ao plasma, né? A gente faz a reentrada então durante a atmosfera. E aí justamente tem essa perda de comunicação de vídeo e rádio.
In the Atlantic coast. And that's done through a series of parachutes. You mentioned the drogues. The drogues provide some initial deceleration as well as stabilization of the vehicle once it passes through the atmosphere. And then those are only deployed for just a few minutes before they're jettisoned and
lembrando que para quem está perdido também ainda, né, para quem ainda não está sabendo, né, mas contando para vocês que agora a partir de hoje, né, a partir de ontem, né, inclusive a Spacex, né, está fazendo as suas transmissões agora pelo X, né, para a plataforma deles, não mais pelo YouTube. Mas a gente então continua fazendo a transmissão para vocês aí no YouTube, das missões aí da SpaceX. Então não se preocupe. Caso você não tenha o X, né, que é o antigo Twitter, não se preocupem que vocês acompanharão aqui sempre ao vivo conosco as transmissões da SpaceX.
that they do both with the NASA teams and the SpaceX teams prior to even arriving at the launch pad.
And they try to maximize the crew's comfort through the duration of Dragon's flight. When we covered undocking just what seems like just a couple of hours ago at this point, they had these launch and entry suits, and that was because they put them on during some of the more
34
dynamic
minutos
phases, and
no
then it
horário
was
de
actual contact and
Brasília.
separation from the International Space Station.
Estamos
But
aí
very
acompanhando
shortly
então
after
ainda
they
a descida de
exited the
órbita,
troposphere, which is only 200 meters away,
para
they got the
então
call
darmos
that they could remove
iniciando
those
aí a
suits,
sequência
and they had the suits
de
off for
reentrada
really
dentro de
the most
instantes.
of the duration of the flight. They have them back on, but you can see their visors are up. And even though this is a very dynamic phase, and this is a 16-minute burn and a very important milestone of the Dragon's return to Earth, the visors will come down and the suits will provide that extra layer of protection through atmospheric reentry. That is a very dynamic phase. Of course, there's the plasma buildup on the outside of the station and a blackout period. There's a lot of stress on the vehicle, so that just provides an extra layer of protection for the crew.
Yeah, you mentioned maximizing crew comfort, and we do that not just through operational decisions like when you can take off or doff the suit, but also the design of the suit itself, as well as the seats. So each crew member has a bespoke spacesuit. They basically the suits are specially fitted for each crew member to make sure that it is as comfortable as possible while maintaining the extraordinary high levels of safety required. But the seats as well also have length and sizing customizations in small, medium, large, basically, for the armrest, the bucket, the seat itself, and as well as the footrest. So yeah, we definitely try to maximize the crew comfort in as many ways as we possibly can. And once again, we are in the deorbit burn. This is the burn that lines the crew up for that precise landing off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And we're just under 5 minutes remaining in this burn.
Yeah, and the crew is really just watching the vehicle perform on its own at this point. They're not really executing any commands.
Estamos então ainda no procedimento de descida de órbita. Estamos então aí no procedimento já de reentrada, quase início de reentrada. Lembrando então que o Splashdown está programado então para acontecer às 1h17 da manhã no horário de Brasília, na costa da Flórida, nos Estados Unidos, do lado Atlântico, próximo aí a Jacksonville.
We're 12 minutes into the burn, have about 4 minutes left.
As we mentioned before, after this deorbit burn is complete, we will be able to close the nose cone, which is the basically the pointy structure at the top of the capsule that has been open to allow for access to that forward hatch, as well as usage of the forward Draco thrusters. So we'll be able to close that, and that will basically make put the capsule back into its aerodynamic shape. And after we close that nose cone, we will begin atmospheric reentry. We will have about a 6 or 7 minute
Então ainda há
period
pouco tivemos aí a
of
transmissão da
anticipated loss
missão
of signal,
Starlink, né,
or
com
LOS,
21
as we'll hear it
satélites,
referred to in comms between
às
ground and
23 horas e 47 minutos,
And there is some margin built into the
no horário
operations.
de
This,
Brasília.
again,
Então,
the deorbit
daqui a
burn is
pouquinho então já
executed
teremos
at
aí
the
a
apogee of
confirmação
their trajectory
também
and
de
allows them to
colocação em
decrease that
órbita desses
altitude. And
21
it's a
satélites.
16-minute burn, so that will take us to about 8:40 Pacific, so just a couple of minutes left. They have about 25 minutes until they start experiencing some drag on the atmosphere, and that allows the Dragon spacecraft to do a couple of things. It allows them to close the nose cone, as you mentioned, and also slew the Dragon once again and get into the entry interface with the pica tiles and the heat shield pointed in the right direction to take the loads of the friction of the atmosphere.
Exactly. So if you want to think about Dragon's orientation at the moment, the forward end, or if if you think of how Dragon is oriented when it's on the launch pad, it's the top end of the Dragon spacecraft is basically pointing forward along their trajectory. So those thrusters are performing a retrograde burn, which is slowing the vehicle down. So we will want to, after this burn is complete, basically rotate the capsule or slew it in order to make sure
de mais
that
minuto, né,
heat shield
teremos aí a
is
conclusão então da descida de órbita.
is what is actually pointing
39 minutos no horário
in
de
the direction of
Brasília.
their trajectory, so that that heat shield is able to do its job, which is really utilize that friction that will be made while coursing through the Earth's atmosphere and slow that vehicle down significantly. Once again, we're going from an orbital velocity of about 17,500 miles per hour, and that atmospheric reentry, that heat shield action will take us down to about 350 miles per hour. So we're about just over 1 minute remaining in the deorbit burn. This is the burn that essentially commits the crew to that precise landing zone just off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Once again, we are targeting a splashdown time of 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern.
And again, this is Mission Control here in Hawthorne. The team's here monitoring Dragon's progress and the progress of that deorbit burn. It'll be the crew operations and resource engineer, the core, that's the voice from here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, that relays the burn performance status up to the crew via Dragon to ground.
On your screen there
Estamos
is
aguardando a
SpaceX core
confirmação
for this
já da reentrada.
shift on console tonight.
Será dentro de mais alguns instantes.
As Gary mentioned, this is the primary communicator.
Lembrando então que quando tivermos a reentrada, né, teremos aí mais ou menos em torno de 7 minutos de perda de comunicação, devido então à alta temperatura do plasma da reentrada na atmosfera. Então nesse momento já foi concluída aí então o procedimento de descida de órbita. E agora então será fechada aí a parte do nariz da Dragon.
Completed and everything went nominal or as expected. So that's all really good news. Very good. We are in the deorbit sequence now. So that you just heard the nose cone is about to close, and I can see it's actually closing now. In the background, the Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe.
Pois é, então, pra mim ficou um bocadinho ruim, né? Porque assim, como eu tenho ainda um monitor, né? Ficou um bocadinho ruim, mas aparentemente deu tranquilo assim, né? Não deu muito problema, né? Mas quem tem um monitor assim como eu, né? Que acompanha também as informações pelo YouTube, junto com o site da Spacex, aí fica um bocadinho ruim, né? Mas já era esperado. Enfim, estamos aguardando então o fechamento então o fechamento então da sequência do nariz então da Dragon. Então essa é a fase física de fato final aí antes da reentrada da atmosfera, né, que é o fechamento então do nariz.
Basically make sure that the heat shield is what is pointing first toward planet Earth, and that will line us up for atmospheric reentry.
Né, e ainda também não temos data para o lançamento então da ULA, né, do Atlas 5. Não temos data ainda confirmada para a tentativa então de lançamento do Atlas 5 e nem a data confirmada então para a missão SLIM lá do Japão, né, porque inclusive aquela região da Ásia, né, principalmente na parte de Taiwan, né, eles estão sofrendo lá com o furacão furacão que está tendo lá naquela região. E com isso, aí prejudica também a parte lá do sul do Japão, né, com a base Tanegashima. Então temos que aguardar a passagem então desse furacão por lá.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll purge some cool air through the suits. But the interior of the capsule, there's also a thermal system that will help pump some cool air there as well. So the crew generally stays really comfortable, even though the exterior of the capsule does get super hot, as you said, with that plasma buildup. It'll be certainly one of the more dynamic things that the spacecraft goes through during its mission. But yeah, the crew stays pretty comfortable, and that nitrox air, which is a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, the same stuff that is put into scuba tanks for scuba divers, that same breathing air, we pump that through the suits to allow the crew to stay super comfy during their re-entry.
We did get confirmation that the nose cone is closed. So this deorbit sequence we're really making our way through very well.
As we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to
Então, nesse momento foi confirmado o fechamento do nariz da Dragon. E agora estamos aguardando o início do procedimento da reentrada. Estamos aguardando então a confirmação da reentrada da Dragon Endeavour. Lembrando que o Splashdown então está programado para acontecer às 1h17 da manhã em Jacksonville, ali na Flórida, no lado Atlântico, no Oceano Atlântico. Então lembrando que a CREW-6, né, ela teve o lançamento feito, iniciou sua missão no dia 2 de março de 2023, né, acoplando no dia 3 de março de 2023 e retornando à Terra após 6 meses. A data de hoje, 4 de setembro de 2023. Aí nesse período aí dessa jornada de 6 meses, nós transmitimos aqui, né, por 2 vezes a caminhada espacial aí pelo lado americano, né, com a participação aí dos astronautas Stephen Bowen e Warren Hoburg. Onde uma das principais tarefas que eles realizaram durante essas caminhadas foram a instalação aí dos painéis solares AIROSA, os painéis solares canadenses.
After Dragon Endeavour has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. As we mentioned before, the first set will be the 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main chutes, and those will guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since launching in April.
Lá, inclusive, lá em cima eles fazem um trabalho pesado, né?
Deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the capsule detect that they are at the right speed and altitude.
Vehicle velocity at drogue deploys approximately 300 miles per hour. They deploy at about 18,000 feet. Then vehicle velocity at main parachute
47 minutos no horário de Brasília. Estamos então acompanhando ao vivo aqui então o procedimento já de quase reentrada da Dragon Endeavour, da tripulação CREW-6. Nesse momento estamos aguardando a confirmação do procedimento de reentrada.
Set of hooks is closed, and the second set of hooks is traveling to secure the nose cone.
Então, nesse momento, estamos aí já confirmando para vocês novamente a confirmação do fechamento do nariz da Dragon. E agora estamos aguardando, então, oficialmente a perda de comunicação, né, devido ao procedimento de reentrada, né, já que devido às altas temperaturas aí durante a reentrada, né, da atmosfera da Terra, vamos ficar aí no período de comunicação em torno de 7 minutos. E o Splashdown então está previsto para acontecer aí por volta de 1h e 17 minutos. na costa da Flórida, no Oceano Atlântico, ali perto de Jacksonville.
It's 8:47 p.m. Pacific time now. We're about 30 minutes from the expected splashdown time. Again, we're tracking 12:17 a.m. Eastern time over in Florida near Jacksonville, which is our primary landing site here at the Pacific Coast, 9:17 p.m.
Dragon, SpaceX, nose cone secured for entry.
Então, nesse momento, já vamos iniciar a sequência de reentrada.
So again, 2 sets of latches that secure that nose cone. Those have traveled and confirmed that not only is the nose
Então, já
cone
foi
closed,
confirmado
but
aí
it
o
is
fechamento
secured
aí da
for re-entry.
confirmado. Então, e agora
And with
vamos
that,
iniciar a
Dragon, I've got
sequência de
a entry
reentrada.
sequence brief. Report ready to copy.
E aí, quem são elas, né? 7 minutos aí de blackout.
SpaceX Dragon, we are ready to copy.
All right, Steve, we see blackout start at 0404, blackout end at 0411, and splashdown at 0417. No update to vehicle status. Weather still looks good. How copy?
Zero 0404, 0411, and 0417. Weather still looks good. And I think that copies it all. Thank you.
Good readback. One more note, we noticed prior to the burn, a few of the tablets were not secure to the satchels. I'm hoping that you can positively verify that each tablet is indeed secure.
We're working on that right now, and we'll get it by 1:50.
Copy.
All right, that was SpaceX Core Jake Vendel letting Commander Steve Bowen know our updated timeline for that expected loss of signal. We heard them read out 0404 to 0411, those times being
Então aí o procedimento de reentrada, né, de perda de sinal, aí teremos aí a confirmação da perda de sinal a partir então da 1h04 da manhã no horário de Brasília, o retorno então do sinal a partir então de 1h11 e o splashdown a partir então de 1h17.
Splashdown time remains as we originally were targeting that 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern.
And you can just see just how quick in succession everything is from 9:04
Então é isso,
to
né? Então
9:11,
temos aí
we go from 17,000
o
miles an hour
procedimento
to
de início de
350
retorno
miles an hour,
aí da
and then
reentrada
through the
da
drogue
perda de
parachute
comunicação
deployment and main parachute
a
deployment
partir
over the
então
course of
da
6
1h04
minutes, we get down to 15
no horário
miles
de
an hour
Brasília.
at the time of splashdown.
Depois a volta do sinal a partir de 1h11 no horário de Brasília e o splashdown 1h17 no horário de Brasília. Então esta é a sequência que vai ser dada em instantes.
We're focusing on the flight control teams here in Mission Control in Hawthorne through the duration of today's operations. If you've been following along for our coverage, we've been joined with the flight control teams over in Houston, Texas. Of course, they are monitoring very closely, but that was really for joint operations. It's a different set of flight criteria and flight rules when the two flight control rooms are working in tandem, operating by the same flight criteria. And there is that dance of the Dragon and the International Space Station. Really, the responsibility of the Dragon is on the teams here in SpaceX. They are, of course, communicating constantly with the teams over at NASA, and the NASA teams are in the loop monitoring the progression of the CREW-6 astronauts and cosmonauts' return home to Earth.
So we've mentioned before that our anticipated loss of signal is coming up at 9:04 p.m. and will last about 7 minutes until 9:11 p.m. Pacific time. This occurs on all of our Dragon reentry missions. It is pretty standard and expected, the 7-minute period where the Dragon is unable to send any telemetry to the ground or be commanded from the ground, including no communications, which is why we call it a communications blackout. So the reason for that being, as we've said a couple of times, the heat shield located at the bottom of the capsule will be doing a ton of work as it encounters that friction from the atmosphere as it re-enters. This is a good thing. It's helping to slow the vehicle down from 17,000 miles per hour to about 350 miles per hour. Now, as a result of all that work being done by the heat shield and the friction, this plasma forms on the exterior of the capsule, and that's why we have these thermal protection systems, or TPS, all around Dragon to help protect it during these phases where that plasma builds up and gets really hot.
Dentro de mais alguns instantes, né, teremos aí o início da reentrada de fato da Dragon, a partir então da
That being said, it
da
does make for
1h04 da manhã no
if
horário
you
de
live
Brasília.
in Central Florida, you will definitely be able to see Dragon streaking across the night sky. Really, if you look up, you won't be able to miss it.
Now, of course, once Dragon splashes down, and we did get that read very recently up to the crew that we're right on target for that 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville. The recovery teams are already staged. We got word that the recovery vessel named Megan is out there. That'll be the one that actually lifts the Dragon capsule up from the water. There's also fast boats and jet skis and whole teams really ready to go to support the recovery operations. We've supported many nighttime landings or splashdowns in the past, and so they're very used to these operations. Dragon has systems built into the outside of the capsule that allow for flashing lights and a lot of calling of attention to itself to make sure that the recovery teams can easily see it. And of course, the assets themselves have equipment on board to be able to locate, track, and find, and of course, recover the Dragon capsule. And so those teams will go out. They'll perform a sniff. That's actually the first thing that'll happen, is the fast boats will circle the vehicle and just make sure that the Dragon capsule itself is safe to approach. There's dedicated teams that go out and make sure there's no leaking of nitrogen tetroxide or any hazardous materials before the rest of the teams move in. There's a lot of team members that are out there now to support the operation.
Yeah, this evening for this Atlantic Coast recovery, we are utilizing our recovery vessel, Megan, and those teams are stationed about 3 miles away from the targeted splashdown site. So it's one of my favorite but frustrating parts of splashdown is after we see the capsule actually land in the water and we see the parachutes be released and splash down as well, we then have to wait for the recovery vessel to trudge those 3 miles, and in that time we're able to see the fast boats approach the capsule, as the name suggests, much faster. They are slower than Megan, the primary recovery vessel. So they can get out there much quicker and perform, as you said, that sniff test as well as recover the parachutes from the water.
Yeah, and we've seen lots of improvements just because, you know, we're talking about CREW-6 right now. So this is not just a 6 mission. We've also done this with the demonstration mission with Bob and Doug, Demo 2. And so this will really be the 7th time that we've done it for a crew operation. And so the recovery teams have become much more efficient and had lessons learned along the way. So the recovery operations we've seen just get a lot faster overall.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've done nighttime splashdown operations for CREW-1, CREW-2, CREW-3, CREW-5, as well as Axiom 2, just a couple months ago. So yeah, the recovery teams at this point have actually had more nighttime splashdowns than they have daytime. I should say for crew missions.
That's right.
Not for NASA crew, but for crewed missions, I'm not counting the cargo missions.
Right. And it is a good nod to make sure that we mention the private missions as well. We mentioned the Axiom mission 1 and 2, of course, Inspiration 4. So there's a lot of practice with the recovery operations in these teams. Of course, we have the views here of the flight operations teams here in Hawthorne that are monitoring the Dragon's re-entry. Again, we've successfully performed a deorbit burn, so we're just waiting for that entry interface that's coming up at 9:04. So really just 7 minutes from now, and that is the beginning of the blackout period. That's when the Dragon capsule starts to experience the molecules of the atmosphere a lot closer, so that it experiences much more friction, and we start to see that plasma buildup, and it provides a significant amount of drag and shaves a lot of velocity off of the Dragon capsule right now, traveling about 17,000 miles an hour, and through the 7-minute period of blackout where there is that plasma buildup, where we are traveling through the more denser parts of the atmosphere and slowing down significantly. We'll get on the back end of that. 9/11, they said, was the exit of that blackout period, where we start getting communications from the crew, and we're on the back end of the entry interface. That will be, we'll get down to 350 miles an hour.
Yeah, if memory serves me correctly, we typically hear SpaceX core start reaching out to the crew about 1 minute early. There have been some instances where we've been able to regain communications with the crew a little bit earlier than originally anticipated. So probably around the 9:10 p.m. Minute mark, Pacific, I should say, we might start hearing SpaceX core hail the CREW-6.
And it could go in the other direction too. This is, of course, an estimate based on the predicted plasma buildup and the predicted comms blackout. But of course, there could be another minute or so before they regain comms, and that's all built into the timeline. We'll hear those checks go up on Dragon to ground, and they'll continuously call the crew.
SpaceX Dragon, tablets are secure, restraints are tightened, visors are down.
Copy Dragon, tablets secure, restraints tightened, and visors down. With that, we are 5 minutes until the predicted comm blackout. Dragon Endeavour, see you on the other side at 0411.
0411, we'll talk to you then.
All right, that was the voice of CREW-6 Commander Steve Bowen, letting us know that the teams have put away and secured the tablets that were prior to now, they were located and strapped onto their legs outside of the spacesuit.
1 hora
So those are
pelo
now
horário
put
de
away.
Brasília. Você
And
está
they've
assistindo
also
então o
closed
canal
the visors. So the
Will
last time we
PTV.
saw the crew,
Estamos então
inside the
acompanhando o
capsule, their
procedimento de
visors were up.
reentrada
They've now closed the visors,
da
and that
cápsula
provides,
da Dragon
really a
Endeavour,
leak-tight environment
tripulação
for
da
the crew,
CREW-6.
during this dynamic phase of reentry.
Reentrada então esperada para acontecer daqui a 4
For those of
minutos.
you that have recently joined over the last 45 minutes, we've basically been executing step-by-step the deorbit sequence, starting with the releasing of the claw, which is what was connecting the Dragon capsule to the trunk being the unpressurized section that is jettisoned in order to reveal the heat shield located at the bottom of the Dragon spacecraft. So we released the claw, the trunk separated. We then performed a 16-minute long deorbit burn. We've also slewed or reoriented the capsule so that the heat shield is facing it's hard to describe it in my head, but it basically, the heat shield is what is leading the capsule to the targeted splashdown site, which today is in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. As we just heard, we have an anticipated loss of signal, or LOS, that will last for 7 minutes, and it will start at 9:04 p.m. Pacific in about 3 minutes from now. That is standard for all of our Crew Dragon reentry missions, and at that point in time, the Dragon will not be able to send any telemetry or data to the ground. The ground will not be able to command Dragon at all, and we will not be able to receive any communications from the crew or
1 hora e 2 minutos, estamos a 2 minutos do início então do blackout de comunicação. E aí vamos ficar então aí até 7 minutos com a perda de comunicação, e aí que são
to determine the performance of the vehicle. We'll see those drogues. There's 4 main parachutes that allow for a safe landing. The parachutes are designed with that 4th in mind, so that even if the 4th were not to inflate all the way, 3 could actually provide enough resistance to properly decelerate the Dragon so that it lands right on time and provides a normal amount of drag on the vehicle to get us down to that 15 miles an hour at the expected time. The views we're seeing now are, of course, of the flight operations team here in Mission Control in Hawthorne. We'll soon hopefully be getting some views from the recovery vessels out in the Atlantic Ocean. That's the recovery vessel Megan, as well as the recovery teams on fast boats and jet skis. We should be getting views hopefully from the Atlantic Ocean to see the CREW-6's entry through the atmosphere.
I was trying to look through my notes. I can't quite remember what it is off the top of my head, but you were talking about the parachutes before, and the drogue chutes that we deploy prior to the main parachutes. Those drogue chutes help provide additional slowing and stability for the Dragon capsule as it comes out.
1h04 no horário de Brasília.
It is that if we didn't have the drogue parachutes, I think it's something like the main parachutes would have to be manufactured
verdade, amigo.
to be 2 to 3 times stronger,
Isso aí é
which
verdade.
of course would add weight to the capsule itself. And in spaceflight,
Estamos aguardando então a confirmação da reentrada,
those
início da
drogue chutes,
reentrada.
are definitely small but mighty in the job that they have to do. Now we're under a minute away from that, or just a couple seconds rather, away from that anticipated loss of signal, or LOS. This will be a 7-minute period in which we are unable to communicate with the crew, and we are unable to command Dragon or receive telemetry or data from it.
Estamos agora oficialmente na reentrada.
Okay, we're in that loss of signal. The clock
Estamos
starts now,
com
right on
perda de
time,
sinal
9:04
agora
p.m.
oficialmente.
Pacific, 12:04 a.m. Eastern. That starts the 7-minute clock.
1h05 no horário de Brasília. Estamos agora
Teams
oficialmente
here in Mission Control in
aí
Hawthorne,
em
they start
blackout de
reaching out to the
comunicação.
crew a little early. The crew themselves may see an acquisition of signal from their own data and call out to the teams to let them know that they're outside of the blackout. It could be intermittent too, so there's a lot of different factors, but the key here is communication, and they'll continue to talk to make sure that they are relaying they, meaning the crew, are relaying the information to the teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne, and of course the Hawthorne will be able to respond.
Right. So for those of you that have just recently joined us, at this point we have entered a
Estamos agora
blackout
em oficialmente então em período então de blackout de comunicação, e vídeo e rádio. Por volta aí em torno de 7 minutos.
By mission control, which you see there on your screen, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication
Estamos aí apenas
is
só
possible. But as a remander,
com dados aí de telemetria. Dentro de instantes aí temos talvez aí possivelmente já contato já com a Dragon, né? Aí o navio já está posicionado, a equipe de resgate já estão posicionadas lá na costa da Flórida, no lado Atlântico, em Jacksonville. Vamos aguardar.
It might be a little bit more, but we will definitely be able to hear the crew once they do re-enter from that anticipated loss of signal. We'll have acquisition of signal, which is AOS.
That's right, and the last read up to the crew prior to their entry and the beginning of the blackout period, we were still tracking an on-time splashdown. Again, for those following along, that's 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific Time.
Agora ficaremos aí em um período de silêncio até a volta da comunicação com a
We're now
Dragon.
within the atmospheric entry phase of the return for the CREW-6 crew. Once again, the plasma buildup on the exterior of the capsule results in our inability to command or communicate with the Dragon capsule during this time. This happens with all of our crew missions, and we expect this to end at about 9:11 p.m. Pacific or 12:11 a.m. Eastern. Live view there of SpaceX Mission Control located just behind Gary and myself. They are continuing to monitor the length of the acquisition of, the length of this blackout period. And we will be able to hear SpaceX core, who for this evening shift is Jake Vendel. We'll probably start to hear him hail the crew around 9:11 or 9:10 p.m. Pacific.
So if you're following along of our coverage and you are in southern Mexico or the Yucatan Peninsula, there is a chance, depending on the weather that you have down there, that you would have been able to see the beginning of the entry interface. We're now about 4 minutes in of a 7-minute blackout period.
This is a great graphic indicating the trajectory. This is an ascending trajectory that Dragon is taking. So as Gary just said, over the Gulf of Mexico, across the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. So if you're tuning in from Central Florida, head outside right now, look up, because this looks like our first live view.
Opa, já temos imagens aí as primeiras imagens, então, aí da Dragon. Temos aí primeiras imagens aí, então, de câmera em infravermelho da Dragon, fazendo então o procedimento de reentrada neste momento. Primeiras imagens então da reentrada da Dragon. Então do navio que já está ali posicionado ali, então da equipe de resgate.
If you're in Central Florida, head outside right now. You should be able to see this glowing streak cross over as we are targeting.
Imagens bonitas aí, então, da reentrada da Dragon Endeavour. Está fazendo então neste momento aí. Nós está ali atravessando então a parte ali do México e Golfo do México. Imagens lindas. Estamos acompanhando agora aí da reentrada da Dragon Endeavour, da tripulação da CREW-6.
And again, there's some variation on when we can hear from the crew.
So what you're seeing on your
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
So at this point, we're going to hear SpaceX core begin to hail, as Gary said.
Imagens lindas aí da reentrada.
So we're now beginning to reach out
Dragon.
to see if we've regained that communications capability.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
Estamos aguardando contato com a Dragon. E bem-vindos de volta. Estamos com contato novamente aí com a Dragon às 11 horas. A 1 hora e 11 minutos no horário de Brasília. Estamos aí com contato novamente com a cápsula Dragon Endeavour. Com imagens então internas da Dragon neste momento, após o período de blackout de comunicação. Imagens lindas aí da reentrada. Reentrada concluída. Então, nesse momento aí, já estamos confirmando a reentrada concluída. Estamos agora aguardando a abertura, então, do paraquedas. Estamos aí novamente com a visões noturna. De câmera noturna.
Typically deploy about 18,000 feet. At that point in time, the capsule is going around 350 miles per hour.
Some of the data and telemetry from Dragon is in meters, so if you do hear those calls from the crew and from us, some of the telemetry we're seeing.
1 hora e 12 minutos no horário de Brasília. Tivemos então agora a reentrada concluída. Estamos aguardando a abertura então do paraquedas.
Confirmation that seat rotation is in progress. This allows the crew to be in the proper position to take the loads of the chutes as they experience the G-forces that the chutes exhibit upon deployment. They provide some drag on the vehicle, And again, we're traveling about 350 miles an hour. So from here, with the drogue deployments and main deployment, we're going to get down to about 15 miles an hour. Drogue deployment coming up in approximately 20 seconds.
Brace for drogue window.
And we're roughly 30 seconds away from that drogue deployment. SpaceX core just telling the crew to prepare for the deployment of those drogue parachutes. At this point in time, they are around, or when the drogues are deployed, they're traveling around 350 miles per hour.
Estamos aí 4
At the time that
minutos
the main
para o
parachutes are
splashdown.
deployed, just seconds later, they'll be going around 120 miles per hour. So these drogue parachutes help provide further deceleration as well as stability for the capsule prior to those main parachute deployments.
Drogue pyros have fired, and we have good confirmation of drogue chutes. 2 drogues.
Então temos aí a confirmação da abertura dos paraquedas auxiliares.
The view from inside the parachute bucket.
Abertura então confirmada aí dos paraquedas. Lembrando que esses são os auxiliares.
Dragon nominal descent rate and recovery team reports a visual on 2 healthy drogues.
Faltando aí 3 minutos para o splashdown.
Should see drogue chute jettison here momentarily. We'll see those 2 chutes that you see be released from the capsule.
E a abertura
just like so.
principal
Release
dos
the 4
paraquedas.
parachutes. Now deploying.
Deploy
At this
então
point in
aí
time,
do
Dragon has
paraquedas
saved all of its
principal,
propulsion systems and
dos
is
4
now,
principais
has already
aí
terminated
paraquedas
that
da
electronic
Dragon
suit and cabin
Endeavour.
purges. Those were helping to
1h15
keep
da
the
manhã no
crew
horário
cool
de
during
Brasília,
re-entry.
então nesse momento se abre
Looks like we have
os 4
4 very
paraquedas
beautiful and healthy main
da
parachutes.
Dragon.
Dragon, we see a nominal descent rate on 4 healthy mains.
SpaceX Dragon copies, and SpaceX Dragon coming up on 1,000.
So there's that confirmation
Copy 1,000 meters.
confirmation of those 4 healthy chute deployments.
1 quilômetro.
Now
Estamos
standing
a 1
by for
quilômetro do
splashdown.
pouso.
At the point of splashdown, the capsule will be going about 15 or 16 miles per hour. Continuing to decelerate from a rate of from a speed of about 120 miles per hour.
800.
So we will now begin.
Copy 800.
to hear
800
Commander Steve
metros.
Bowen call out the altitude as they approach the water surface.
That is again in meters.
Landing in water is simpler and provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. We had to learn how to make Dragon waterproof, but once you do that, it's very much a rinse, review, reuse type process.
600.
600
Copy
metros.
600.
600 meters, and the descent rate is as predicted, meaning we're targeting that splashdown time in about a minute.
Live view of Dragon Endeavour with the CREW-6 team members on board, being held up by 4 beautiful main parachutes.
Dragon, we see 400.
400.
We're now about 400 meters above the ocean surface.
SpaceX Dragon 200 sprays for blast.
200 metros.
Copy braced for splashdown.
Again, the seats have been rotated in a position to take the loads of re-entry and parachute deployment as well as splashdown. The crew is braced. We are inside 100 meters.
Dragon Endeavour continuing its slow descent.
E Splashdown.
There we can see
Splashdown.
Splashdown on screen.
Splashdown confirmado às 1h18 da
Those
manhã no
parachutes
horário
are
de
then cut
Brasília.
and released. Dragon
Bem-vindos
Endeavour
de
has now
volta,
returned home. NASA astronauts Steve Bowen,
Steve
Hoburg,
Bowen
Sultan Alneyadi, and Andrey Fedyaev.
e
Splashdown, you're in water refining.
Copy splashdown, and we see main chutes cut.
então sejam bem-vindos de volta Stephen Bowen, Warren Hoburg, Sultan Alneyadi e Andrey Fedyaev.
After a 17-hour return journey from space, CREW-6 is
Splashdown confirmado com sucesso às 1h18 da manhã no horário de Brasília. Após 6 meses a bordo então na Estação Espacial Internacional, depois do dia 2 de março de 2023, retornando hoje, 4 de setembro de 2023. Então sejam bem-vindos novamente à Terra.
Copy, Stable 1. Dragon Endeavour, on behalf of NASA and SpaceX, welcome back home. Thank you for flying SpaceX.
Thanks, SpaceX. Endeavour, we greatly appreciate all the support from all the initial training through the launch, throughout the mission, keeping us abreast of all the
Então nesse momento aí agora as equipes de resgate vão indo lá resgatar a cápsula da Dragon.
Copy all, and you've got a room full of happy people here. We've got some systems to verify safe before we give the boats a go to approach. I'll be back with you on that topic in a minute.
Então é 1h18 no horário de Brasília. Então tivemos aí confirmado o Splashdown no dia 4 de setembro de 2023.
So there we just heard SpaceX Core just indicating to the crew that we're going to do some checks here. Here from Mission Control Hawthorne, we're going to do some system checks to make sure that everything is safe as necessary on the Dragon Endeavour capsule. They will then give the go for safe approach to the teams there that you see on your screen in the fast boats. One of those boats will focus on recovering the parachutes from the water. The other will begin inspections, a sniff test for those onboard propellants, nitrogen tetroxide and monomethylhydrazine. They are toxic if someone were to breathe them, so we definitely want to ensure the safety of the entire recovery team as well as the crew. So one of the teams in the fast boats will perform a sniff test using devices while wearing personal protective equipment to ensure that none of those propellants have leaked out and that there's no vapors lingering from, just many minutes ago when those thrusters were actually firing back in space.
Precisely. Now this is the 4th splashdown of Dragon Endeavour.
Temos também confirmado aí também o deploy de 21 satélites Starlink, né, que teve lançamento realizado com sucesso às 23h47 no horário de Brasília, né, na data de ontem, dia 3 de setembro.
And the crew and teams here in Hawthorne reported a stable 1 position. That just notifies that the capsule is in the ideal position, floating in the Atlantic Ocean there, upright, with the heat shield in the water and the nose cone pointed towards the sky, as you see there.
As you mentioned, this is the 4th splashdown for this particular capsule. Most recently, it supported Axiom 1. Prior to that, CREW-2. And prior to that, Demo 2. So this capsule, I have great personal attachment to. I had the opportunity as part of my day job to go inside the capsule while we were building it. And when I say building it, I mean like for the first time, not during the refurbishment process. And when we were originally building it for the Demo 2 mission. I just remember being inside this capsule and thinking,
Dragon, SpaceX, we are go for recovery personnel to approach the capsule. Expect fast boats alongside in just a few minutes.
Dragon top, we'll look for the light.
all right, good news there from Mission Control, letting the crew know that everything checked out from a systems check, and the team there on screen in the fast boat now has the green light to approach and begin performing these sniff checks for those vapors for the onboard propellants. Just to conclude my thought, it's always great to see this capsule fly and land, and it just makes me so happy to see it with another mission under its belt.
It's part of the design of the Dragon capsule is to be reusable. So even after the harsh conditions of 3,500 degrees of plasma buildup and being in the salty ocean, teams are still able to refurbish it and prepare it for the next mission. And this is the 4th successful flight of Endeavour. So after those hypergol checks, Dragon teams will we may see some of the team members crawling on the outside of Dragon and begin the rigging process as the recovery vessel Megan has the equipment necessary to bring the Dragon out of the water into what's called the Dragon's nest. And that allows the capsule to be positioned and stable on a boat and allow the some of the personnel on board that boat, that ship, to open up the side hatch. We were talking about the side hatch a little earlier. That has remained closed through the duration of the mission. The last time it was open was on Launch Pad 39A as some of the teams were preparing Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey for their launch to the International Space Station and the beginning of their expedition of science, maintenance, and upgrades aboard. Now it'll be opened again here very shortly. It does take some time. So it could be 30 minutes to an hour.
Agora, nesse momento, estamos aí vendo o procedimento, então, de resgate aí da cápsula da Dragon Endeavour, que vai então ser resgatada e colocada dentro de uma balsa, dentro de um barco, né, de resgate, como a gente já viu nas missões anteriores. E aí temos aí fotos dos momentos então da reentrada, agora há pouco.
NASA's VAB and Pad 39A in the distance. So this is such a cool time-lapse capture of the re-entry.
Imagem linda então aí da reentrada
of the CREW-6 re-entry and splashdown.
De agora a pouco.
Now, of course, we have recovery teams out there that are executing these operations. We can actually see some of the personnel there. We do have a public affairs officer on recovery vessel Megan, Courtney Beasley, who is standing by and watching the operations unfold and providing some coverage from there. I'll do a comms check with Courtney Beasley, who's there via satellite phone. Courtney, can you hear us?
Gary, I have you loud and clear. How do you hear me?
Loud and clear. Courtney, we were very jealous, and we were talking a lot, Kate and I, about the views of Dragon's re-entry through the atmosphere and the plasma trail and the landing, of course, in the Atlantic Ocean. I can't imagine a person who had a better view than you. From your perspective on recovery vessel Megan, how was that landing?
Gary, it was absolutely beautiful. We were about 1.5 nautical miles away from the landing zone, and we had a great view from the front of the ship. We were actually able to track the spacecraft starting when it broke the horizon. We heard the sonic boom loud and clear and tracked the spacecraft all the way down through Splashdown.
Spacex,
There's something beautiful about a nighttime splashdown. The only thing lighting the sky up tonight is the moon, the stars, and CREW-6 returning back home to Earth.
Stand by for a PMC with the SpaceX flight surgeon on the ship.
And
we did just hear a call out indicating that the sniff checks were successful, so the close approach team now has the green light to begin climbing on board the Dragon capsule, so we should see the recovery continue along. But I want to hear more from Courtney.
Então, nesse momento agora, vamos iniciando aí o procedimento de resgate da cápsula Dragon.
For some of those communications with the crew and just follow along on the action here, but really want to understand what it's like there. You got some beautiful views. We are seeing, some of the seas. I think that we're tracking about. We're tracking sea states and wind, and we were talking about weather quite a bit leading up to today's landing. From your perspective, how is the weather out there?
Yeah, Gary, it's about 80 degrees out here right now with fairly clear skies. Like I said, we were able to track that spacecraft pretty good tonight. About 9-mile-an-hour winds out of the east. The waves are considered to be rolling waves, so they're not choppy, but they are pretty big and more spread out rolling waves. But weather-wise, I think the crew will like what they feel when they get out of that capsule today and take their first breath of fresh air back here on Earth.
Just to get some appreciation of what it took to stage the recovery forces and be prepared for this moment, just really moments after Dragon splashed down. We saw some of those fast boats rolling out to make sure that they were getting the crew as quickly as possible. Can you give us a sense of what it's taken to make sure the recovery vessels were here at this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Our journey actually started several hours ago in Jacksonville. The MedOps teams and the recovery director boarded the first helicopter, and they were the first group to arrive on the ship about 4.5 hours before splashdown. So those medical teams took the time to get everything situated on the ship and ready to tend to the crew. And about 2 hours before splashdown, they deployed the fast boats into the water. I was actually on the second helicopter out, and we landed on the helicopter pad on top of the vessel about an hour before splashdown. And all of the teams have been hard at work since we touched down on the boat to get their various disciplines ready for CREW-6 to arrive home.
Excellent, Courtney. And last question before we let you go is we're seeing some of the recovery personnel on the Dragon capsule preparing for its eventual lift onto recovery vessel Megan. What can we expect to see in the next few moments?
Yeah, Gary, so once the crew is out
Copy. We also have you 5x5. Boats are working on you and rigging up the vehicle. I'll get back to you closer to capsule lift.
Teams, and we'll have the opportunity to take those spacesuits off and get comfortable back here on Earth. And then, of course, they'll run through those medical checks. They'll get back on the helicopter and head back to the airport where they'll board their planes back to Houston to begin their post-flight period. You're probably getting a better view than I am right now, so I'll let you walk through that. But back here on the ship, once the crew is off,
Para você que está chegando agora na nossa transmissão, né, acompanhamos aqui o Splashdown da CREW-6 da Dragon Endeavour, que aconteceu às 1h18 da manhã no horário de Brasília, do dia 4 de setembro de 2023, após 6 meses em órbita na Estação Espacial Internacional. Agora, nesse momento, estamos acompanhando, então, o procedimento de resgate, onde então equipes da Spacex já estão fazendo os preparativos, então, para colocar a cápsula no barco, né, e fazer, então, toda a parte de procedimento de resgate da tripulação.
We're back in the action now, seeing some of the views from the recovery vessel and the recovery operations team, including helicopters, fast boats, jet skis, and of course, we're getting views from some of the ships that are standing by waiting to actually pull Dragon out of the water.
So at this point in time, the Dragon capsule has safed all of its systems. Mission control
Lembrando que a
did
Splashdown então
a
aconteceu
system
em
check to make sure that
Jacksonville,
that was
na costa da
true and
Flórida,
accurate. They gave the
no
fast approach
Oceano
teams
Atlântico.
the green light to approach and begin the rigging process, which is what we are now seeing underway. Additionally, they have recovered the parachutes from the water. So those were, we were able to see those being dragged onto a boat. And what we have now is there's one individual that we see kind of like a spider monkey crawling all around the capsule and attaching the necessary rigging, the straps. These are what will help to stabilize and lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. For tonight's operations, we are using our Atlantic Coast recovery vessel, Megan, and we, in hopefully in probably like 30-ish minutes from now. It kind of varies depending on the sea states, which, as we can see, a little bit more waves than some other missions, but still well within the limits for recovery. Really probably unfazing to the individuals that are out here doing the work as they train extensively for these operations, whether it's daytime or nighttime. So obviously we can see one person there working to secure that strap around the base of the service section of the Dragon capsule, and that is one of the primary stabilization strap rings that will help to lift the capsule out of the water and onto the Dragon's nest on board Megan.
And of course, the teams here are very close to the capsule because we passed those hypergol leak checks, and it's safe around the vehicle. You see some of the personnel, of course, climbing on the outside, preparing the vehicle. You can actually see some of the tethers that are on the outside to allow it to be lifted onto the recovery vessel Megan. Some of our views are even getting better as the recovery ships that are providing some of the live views that we're seeing are getting closer to the Dragon Endeavour.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, this is one of the coolest but also frustrating moments of recovery for me personally, just because obviously for safety reasons, we have to station the recovery vessel and team a safe distance away from the intended splashdown target. It sounded like they were, according to Courtney, about 1.5 nautical miles away from the splashdown, but those fast boats are called fast boats for a reason. The primary recovery vessel, Megan, is not a fast boat, so it does take about 30 minutes for it to reach the capsule, essentially. So it's great because we see the views get closer and closer slowly, but just because I love to see the action as soon as possible, I wish it was a little bit closer, but that's just me.
It's great to get some of these thermal images. Of course, over on the East Coast, it's well past midnight, so very dark out there, but still getting some fantastic views. The recovery forces are not necessarily getting our views. You know, they don't have the thermal cameras. They're getting eyes on the vehicle.
This is what they're saying. This is an
precisely
actual visible spectrum.
Yes, with the visible spectrum, because of course the vehicle is being lit by spotlights, and you can see the fast boat itself has lights. So there's plenty of opportunities to make sure they have the capsule well within view, and all the teams that are surrounding
Bem,
different
estamos aí
recovery
então
ships and
acompanhando
different
agora o
recovery vessels are
procedimento
aware
de
of the
resgate da
capsule's
cápsula
presence.
Dragon Endeavour. Estamos aí então vendo os preparativos para que ela possa então ser colocada agora no barco de resgate.
You can see some of the features
Aqui já
of
está
the Dragon capsule as the recovery forces
a caminho, né?
outfit it with the rigging necessary to bring it
Então
onto
para
recovery
fazer
vessel
o
Megan.
resgate.
Some of the circles you see in front of the individual that's on the Dragon capsule, that's where those parachutes were deployed from. Above that is the nose cone, which is of course
Lembrando que o Splashdown então aconteceu por volta de 1h18 minutos no dia 4 de setembro de 2023 na costa da Flórida, nos Estados Unidos, em Jacksonville, no Oceano Atlântico.
Some of the dark circles you see at the front of the vehicle, and by front I mean where that individual is on the capsule. The darker
Então, nesse
circles
momento, as
are some of the
equipes
outlines
de
of where
resgate
those,
elas estão
service section
preparando a
breakers
cápsula
are.
Dragon, né,
And
para
the
que ela
brighter
seja
white area is actually
aí
the base
guinchada, né, e
of the
colocada
Super Draco engines.
no barco de
These
resgate.
are inhibited once it gets into orbit, but are very much necessary through the launch phase. In the event of any abort that is necessary, it would be those Super Dracos that you're seeing, the bright white area, that would fire and provide enough thrust capability to escape a speeding Falcon 9 rocket.
Once again, we can see the recovery vessel Megan making its way closer and closer to the Dragon Endeavour capsule, which has splashed down off the Atlantic coast of Florida. We can see the recovery team in the fast boats that have now approached the Dragon capsule. They are in the process of rigging it up with the necessary straps and equipment that will be utilized for right there.
Então tá aí,
That
estamos
is
com
the
imagens
actual
do
the
barco de
Dragon's nest
resgate,
that
né?
we
Onde
will
então
be
vai fazer
lifting
aí
the
a
Dragon capsule
captura
onto. The lifting
da
mechanism,
cápsula, então, da
it's kind of hard to tell
Dragon,
right
né?
now,
Que vai
but that
ser colocado então aí
almost house-like
neste
structure
barco.
over the
Aí vamos
end
acompanhar
of
aí
the
todo o procedimento
aft end of the boat will
de
actuate
resgate e da saída
downward,
também da
and
tripulação.
then the straps will be used to lift the Dragon capsule, and then the whole thing will actuate back into the orientation that we see it here to help secure, or to place it and to secure the Dragon capsule in that nest. After the capsule is placed in the nest, they will then just roll or translate the nest forward to where the platform is that we will actually be able to see the recovery team open the side hatch and eventually have CREW-6 egress or exit from the capsule. So if you look through the back there, you can see the capsule. That's that white speck in the background there in the darkness behind Megan.
Yeah, you can actually see the distance now. It's becoming much more clear. The space recovery vessel was designed very much with Dragon in mind. Of course, that hydraulic lift bringing it onto the Dragon's nest, and that platform, Kate, that you were describing, it allows for access right at the right spot, right in front of that side hatch. The side hatch will be facing right towards the camera. That will allow when that Dragon nest comes in towards that platform, the crew on board recovery vessel Megan will have access to that side hatch to go ahead and open that. All 4 crew members will remain seated throughout that process, but the Dragon side hatch will be open, and the recovery teams will take the CREW-6 astronauts and cosmonaut out one at a time.
Yeah, you mentioned that this vessel had Dragon in mind. You couldn't be more correct. When SpaceX acquired this vessel, we actually have 2 of them, one for
Sim, é verdade, amigo. Hoje deu tudo certo aí, né? Obrigado aí, né, por estar sempre aí acompanhando nossa transmissão aí, né? Desejo a você aí uma ótima segunda, né? Sei que você já está indo dormir aí.
To accommodate efficient and speedy operations for Dragon recovery. In addition to these physical recovery assets, there are also medical bays where each crew member will get a quick medical checkout by the flight surgeon after egress, as well as a helicopter deck that in some instances is utilized to have the crew depart from there. So it is definitely a bespoke boat, if you will, a vessel for these Dragon recovery operations. And it's quite necessary because we want to make sure that these operations are as efficient as possible. We don't want to leave the crew in the water or in the capsule any longer than they need to be. So we really try to make sure that this is as efficient as possible. And certainly this vessel, both vessels, because like I said, they're pretty much mirror images for both Gulf and Atlantic coast operations. We make sure that they are as smooth as possible.
And we're just about 23 minutes from the time of splashdown. Again, that splashdown time 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific. So we're already closing in on the vehicle. The recovery teams at this point, just to do a quick recap, have done initial checks of the spacecraft to make sure there was no hypergol leaks, any hazardous gases or materials, just to do a quick sniff check and make sure that the spacecraft was safe to approach. Once that was cleared, we saw some individuals on the Dragon capsule outfitting it with the rigging necessary for those straps you see on recovery vessel Megan. That hydraulic lift will bend forward and be attached to the Dragon capsule and be lifted off right onto that beautiful, perfectly Dragon-designed little disc you see on the Dragon nest. That's where Dragon will rest very comfortably to allow access to the crew. So that has happened over the past 24 minutes or so. And we are making great progress right on the timeline for the recovery ship to arrive.
Dragon, SpaceX, be advised, we're transitioning the forward link over to the recovery vessel. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
SpaceX Dragon top.
Então, dentro de aproximadamente 5 minutos, nós teremos então a colocação da cápsula Dragon aí dentro desta do barco de
Once again, Megan
resgate.
is making its way to the capsule, which we can see getting
Então aí
larger.
temos
There
aí
in the background
mais e mais
of
perto
this
então a visão da
image, or
Dragon.
excuse me, of this shot that we have
Neste
on
momento
board
agora
Megan.
estão aí fazendo então os procedimentos finais aí para a colocação aí da
Once the
cápsula
capsule
Dragon
is, a
dentro
little
aí
bit
deste
closer, we'll
barco.
begin to see the team in the water,
Então cada vez mais
attach
perto estamos nos
the
aproximando da
straps and,
Dragon.
all the equipment necessary from the boat onto all the straps and equipment that they have been attaching around and on the Dragon capsule itself. We can see the recovery team member who is the individual that basically crawls around on top of the capsule itself, still on there. Once all of the equipment is attached, we'll actually see them jump off into the water. I imagine that for that person, that is probably one of the most exciting parts of their job. Definitely not something that I personally would look forward to. Something else that we also sometimes see with these night recoveries is due to the lights near the water, bugs will be attracted occasionally, as well as smaller fish. And so we might actually see some dolphins as we have in the past. Sometimes they come out because the hunting is maybe a little easier with them attracted to the water surface with all the light. Obviously, we need lots of light to ensure safe operations as we're progressing through these recovery steps.
So you can see one of the rigging equipment was thrown to the fast boat, now attached to Dragon. Again, this is on a hydraulic lift that will safely lift a Dragon capsule out of the water and onto that disc you see at the bottom of your screen. The recovery forces here have trained time and time again for this operation, have a good sense of what to do in this particular scenario. This is one of the better case scenarios for Dragon. We talked about it landing in a stable 1 configuration. That would be lifting the capsule off when it's upright. There are different configurations that the crews are trained to accommodate.
As we mentioned before, the Dragon capsule is soon to be lifted onto the recovery vessel Megan. It will then, once it's in the Dragon's nest there that we can see on screen, it'll be pulled forward to the recovery platform, which is currently off screen, but we'll get a view of that later on whenever Dragon is in place. The crew will egress. They will...
Dragon, SpaceX, forward link transition complete. Com check.
SpaceX Dragon, heavy line clear.
Glad to hear from you. An update, the recovery vessel is backing up to the ship now, maybe 50 meters away, and looking for your go to come on board with internal cameras.
SpaceX Dragon, come on board.
Copy.
At this point in time, rough estimation for crew egress is anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how additional safety checks.
Você está acompanhando então nosso canal, você está assistindo o canal WillPTV. Estamos então acompanhando o momento agora de resgate da tripulação da CREW-6, que fez o Splashdown agora há pouco, às 1h17 da manhã, no horário de Brasília, na costa da Flórida, nos Estados Unidos. Ali na região então do Oceano Atlântico, em Jacksonville. Agora, nesse momento, estamos aí acompanhando o procedimento de resgate da cápsula, que vai ser colocada aí neste barco de resgate que vocês estão vendo na sua tela. Vai ser agora, nesse momento, guinchada. Aí agora, nesse momento, estamos vendo o momento então do guinchamento da cápsula Dragon, que vai ser então colocada aí na balsa de resgate.
So one of the lines of the hydraulic lift has now been thrown to the rigger. The hydraulic lift is now moving into position, moving forward. This is the position that allows the initial lift of the Dragon capsule out of the Atlantic Ocean and then onto the Dragon nest.
Dragon SpaceX rigging complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
SpaceX starting top, we'll be waiting.
So the clock starts now at 9:48 p.m. Pacific time, 12:48 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be looking for Dragon to be lifted out of the water at approximately 9:53 p.m. Pacific, 12:53 a.m. Eastern.
Right before the Dragon capsule is lifted out of the water, we'll see that recovery team member who is currently still standing there. He's actually standing in the bucket where the main parachutes were located during Dragon's flight. Obviously, those buckets are that bucket is now empty as we deployed the main parachutes. But we will see that team member jump off and away from the capsule just prior to the capsule being lifted out of the water.
Dragon, brace for capsule lift.
There they go.
SpaceX Dragon will brace.
We mentioned a couple of times the recovery team's familiarity with these operations and able to move a little bit quicker. They prepped the crew for about 5 minutes of capsule lift. That happened in just a couple of minutes.
And it looks like we are starting to see the capsule be lifted out of the water. We can now start to see the
Então, nesse momento, às 1h50 da manhã, no horário de Brasília, a cápsula Dragon, então, já está sendo colocada para dentro do barco de resgate.
Will be utilized to center Dragon on the nest there at the aft end of the vessel. I love this view because you can see the state of the heat shield. It did such incredible work during atmospheric re-entry.
Então tá aí 1h51 no horário de Brasília. A tripulação da Dragon Endeavour da CREW-6 está oficialmente então resgatada. E aí podemos observar então o estado, né, logo após a reentrada, como é que fica então da cápsula da Dragon.
The Dragon capsule after they made their splashdown.
Estamos vendo aí no interior da Dragon, né? Estamos vendo como é que fica escura, né? Também devido após a reentrada, né? Por conta que é liberada então aquela parte de trás da Dragon, né? Então aí eles ficam aí meio que as escuras aí, né?
Cabin lights on the inside the Dragon are off as the crew patiently waits for the recovery forces to do their job and get them out of the water and, of course, ready for egress.
Dragon, I'm happy to see you safe and sound on board.
Então, nesse momento, oficialmente, então, estamos concluindo aí o procedimento de resgate da cápsula Dragon após o Splashdown.
SpaceX Dragon copies. We'll be waiting.
Então, nesse momento, estamos iniciando o procedimento agora para a despressurização da cápsula Dragon e a abertura da escotilha.
And you can sort of see in the middle of your view of Dragon, there is that nice square feature that is the side hatch. When the Dragon nest moves into the recovery vessel towards that platform, it allows the recovery teams that are on that platform to perform the operations of opening the hatch. The teams you've seen so far have been responsible for the rigging and the operation of the hydraulic lift to bring the Dragon capsule onto the Dragon nest. Now they'll hand it over to the teams that will get the CREW-6 astronaut and cosmonaut safely out of the capsule.
Yeah, it's important to note that all 4 crew members will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while they exit the capsule. You know, it's the same process for any returning crew from a long duration mission. And it makes sense because returning to, you know, our environment here with gravity can really wreak havoc on our bodily systems and especially those that are responsible for balance and control. So we will be providing assistance, but I'm sure we will be seeing smiles and thumbs up along the way.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons. Of course, we've been talking a lot about the operations, but really we should mention the science. Of course, the reason the Dragon is returning from space is because their mission, the CREW-6 astronauts and cosmonauts, was a 6-month expedition on board the International Space Station, an orbiting laboratory for science, maintenance, technology demonstrations. It's the lab that allows gravity to be taken out of the equation, and you can find some new and interesting things about many different parts of science: physical science, biological sciences, and of course human sciences. You can learn a lot about the human body, and that's very necessary for learning how humans adapt to space and, of course, returning from space to a one-gravity environment. Very necessary for understanding how to send humans further into the solar system, to the moon and to Mars.
So we're now standing by for translation of the Dragon capsule to the recovery platform. Basically meaning that once everything checks out here, we should see the entire capsule move towards us. We'll get a different camera view on board the recovery vessel once the Dragon capsule starts to move, but it'll basically put it right up next to the platform that is basically right at the same height as the bottom of the side hatch. Oh, there we have our first movement of Dragon Endeavour making its way
Nesse momento a cápsula Dragon está se movendo aí, né, para os inicialização aí do procedimento então, da despressurização e a abertura da escotilha.
SpaceX Dragon, we did, and you turned them on us. We were enjoying the nice calm lighting. But he's turning the back off again. Good. We're enjoying the lighting. We have to see what's going on outside this way.
No worries on the lighting. Fine with the lights off. I imagine your re-entry was pretty amazing. Side hatch opening should be any minute now, and I think that's about it for me working with you all tonight. It's great to see you back. Steve, Woody, Sultan, Andrey. Happy to have you back home safe.
Então agora nesse momento a cápsula Dragon está aí posicionada para que possam então ser retirados aí, né, ser resgatados a tripulação da CREW-6. Então nesse momento então vamos iniciar o procedimento aí de despressurização e abertura da escotilha.
Absolutely, we'll take care of that. and they're on now.
So we'll be seeing those lights turn on here momentarily, but again, they've been off in this configuration, so if you're trying to imagine what the crew was experiencing
Estamos
during
agora na
reentry, it was with the
configuração de
darkness,
off.
but there are those windows on the Dragon itself, and through the plasma buildup, they were able to see some of the plasma come through the windows and really get to experience the full
Estamos aí retornando para a luz
experience that
interna aí
is
da
re-entering
cápsula
from
Dragon.
space into the Earth's atmosphere and just sit back and relax and enjoy it.
Yeah, that also makes sense given that it is dark out and, you know, for them to be able to, where possible, see the recovery operations happening outside. Yeah, same reason why, you know, as kids we're not allowed to turn lights on in the car when mom and
Estamos
dad
agora
are driving
iniciando
at
o
night,
procedimento
because
de
you can't
abertura
see
da
very well
escotilha.
outside, so that makes a lot of sense. But we did ask them to turn them back on just so that we're able to help the crew.
Eu vou deixar um
egress.
recadinho aqui para vocês aqui
And,
embaixo.
once the side hatch is open, we'll
Quem puder
the
então
flight surgeon will be the first
ajudar
person to
aqui
poke
com
their
o
head in,
canal,
just
né?
do a quick, thumbs up
Já
scan,
com a sua inscrição e
of all
por seu
4 crew
like, já é
members,
muito bem-vindos aí.
to make sure everything is good. But what
Eu
we're
estou
doing
sempre
right
por
now
aqui,
on
né,
the
fazendo as
outside of the capsule,
transmissões
we're doing
aqui
additional
das
safety
missões
checks.
ao redor
We
do
saw
mundo.
momentarily some of the recovery
É sempre com
team,
cobertura
they
completa para
had,
vocês.
face masks on. This
E também
is
aí com
personal
as caminhadas
protective equipment, or
espaciais.
PPE.
E lógico,
It's
com
basically
conteúdos aí
a respirator
de
to allow them
matemática
to
também.
breathe clean air. They're just going to do some additional sniff
Quem
tests
puder
for
colaborar, né,
any lingering
com o canal, né,
hyperball
basta
vapors.
seguir aí, né,
Once
deixar
again,
a sua
the
inscrição,
onboard propellants that we use,
deixar o like
nitrogen tetroxide and
e principalmente também aí comentar nos vídeos,
are
né,
toxic if,
comentar os
you know, we
os
come into
comentários de
contact with them or
vocês.
we breathe those vapors. So
São muito
just once again
importantes
ensuring full safety for the
aí para
recovery
nós,
team
para mim
on
aqui, né.
board, as well as the crew as we prepare to open that
Sempre
side hatch.
estou vendo
We wanna make
todos
sure
os
that none of those
comentários de
vapors are lingering.
vocês.
Side hatch, if we get these views from the inside, we'll also be able to alternate from the outside.
Então,
It is
nesse
now
momento,
open. See, the
está
recovery
aberta
team
a
is open and
escotilha da
waiting for the
Dragon
crew.
Endeavour
First humans
a
that
1 hora e
CREW-6 has
59
seen,
minutos
on
no
the
horário
ground in
de
6 months.
Brasília.
Looks
Oficialmente,
like we got
então,
some fist bump action.
bem-vindos novamente de
Thumbs up.
volta à Terra.
Seems like the crew is in pretty good spirits after their
E agora vamos ver
journey
então
back
quem
home.
será o
I'm
primeiro
not getting audio, but I am
a
getting
sair.
reports that on the recovery ship there was a big round of applause.
Então, nesse
From all the
momento será
recovery
iniciado o
team
procedimento
on
de
the
ingresso
recovery vessel Megan as soon as that
ao
side hatch
barco aí
opened
de
for the crew,
resgate.
congratulating them on a successful mission and successful
Né, vamos
return
ver
home.
então quem será o primeiro. Então, 1 hora e
So once
59
again, this is
minutos
the first
no
time,
horário de Brasília, então foi
that the
aberta então
side hatch
a
has been
escotilha.
opened since the day that the crew lifted off from pad 39A. This side hatch is not utilized while they are on station. We use the forward hatch or the hatch located at the top of the Dragon capsule.
Agora estão fazendo o procedimento
for
aí de
ingress and egress to
fixação
the space station. So,
da
this is the
escotilha, né,
first
para que
time,
ninguém
that the side hatch is open and,
aí se
and, like
machuque
you said, Gary, their first
na hora
breath
da
of
saída.
fresh air since their departure. So we'll also see the Spacex recovery
Estamos aí
team,
aguardando aí quem será o
perhaps they
primeiro
already installed it, but they, yeah, I think they
sair
did.
então da
It's a
da
protective casing
nave da Dragon.
around the side hatch. As we mentioned before, we do reuse these capsules. This is actually the 4th flight for this particular capsule, so to help make sure
Lembrando
that
que
we
depois
protect
desta
the
transmissão,
hardware,
né, estaremos aí
as well
divulgando
as
os
the
melhores
spacesuits,
momentos
themselves.
desta transmissão
We want to make sure
nosso
that
canal aqui
that
no
side
YouTube.
hatch has a little bit of protection. So there's a small piece that they put around the edge to help protect it. Looks like we're getting some initial photos of the crew's return while continuing to secure that side hatch.
Nesse momento eles estão tirando fotos
Make
aí
sure it
da
stays in the
tripulação após
upright
o
position
retorno.
while the crew
É
is
com sucesso.
making their way out.
Aí lembrando
Again,
que
we
o
will be
Splashdown
providing
então
assistance to all
aconteceu
4 crew members as they egress,
1 hora e
as
17
returning to our
no horário de Brasília,
1G
aí
environment,
na
our
costa
one
da
gravity
Flórida,
environment here
no
on
Oceano
Earth,
Atlântico, em
can,
Jacksonville.
be
E
difficult
agora, às
after
2
spending
horas
so
e
many
2
months in
minutos,
space.
no horário de Brasília, estamos acompanhando então o início do
Once again, this crew
ingresso
lifted off
da tripulação
in
da
very early
CREW-6.
March, so they've certainly been enjoying microgravity for a while.
It's important to note all the team members it takes to perform a successful recovery operations. We have specialized personnel out to drive the fast boats and secure rigging equipment, operate the hydraulic lift to bring Dragon onto the Dragon's nest and move it into position. Now we have specialists that are dedicated to understanding the Dragon's systems, successfully opening up the side hatch and knowing the insides of the Dragon vehicle to basically unfasten, unbuckle the 4 crew members from the vehicle and start bringing them out one at a time. We, of course, have medical personnel on board, with medical facilities on board as well to provide standard checks and see test.
Nesse momento aí estamos vendo a fixação aí da escotilha,
Kate, you mentioned there is
para que a tripulação possa sair tranquilamente.
In a helicopter stage. So after the medical checks, initial medical checks, the crew will be able to get a very quick ride home to the Florida coast, where they'll hop on a plane and make their way back over to Houston for further testing and, of course, to see their families, who will be eagerly awaiting their arrival. It's important to note that Stephen, Woody, Sultan, Andrey will be getting assistance from these recovery teams while exiting the capsule. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members, as returning to the gravity environment can be a big toll on the vestibular system, responsible for maintaining balance and motion. So safety, again, is our #1 priority with this operation. You'll see the crew members helped out of the capsule one by one and assisted the few feet to the medical quarters on aboard the boat. If you've ever watched crews return on a Soyuz, this is the same process when astronauts are carried from the capsule to waiting chairs and then carried to waiting medical tents. This is also a period where any time critical cargo can be recovered from the spacecraft. They're positioned right underneath the crew members, and they can be brought back into port relatively quickly. Once the ship and capsule return to shore, the recovery team will perform additional inspections before loading Dragon onto a flatbed truck at the SpaceX facility in Cape Canaveral for post-processing.
Estamos então aguardando o primeiro a sair, né?
The effort to make
deve
sure
ser
that there's
o
a bit
Stephen
more
Bowen.
room for crew egress within the capsule, we are currently detaching and
Lembrando que a saída
removing the
deles então vai
footrests
ser realizada por
that we saw
e
attached to
acompanhados
each
então
of
por
the
médico.
4 seats inside Dragon.
Pessoal,
This just helps
como
to create a
acontece
little bit more
então
space and enable the
com
crew
a,
to get out a little
tanto
bit
com a
easier.
Soyuz quanto com a
We'll
missão
also
chinesa
likely see
também,
them put
né? Que quando eles saem
a small
por um.
slide up against the side hatch, and that will allow the crew to kind of slide out a little bit to egress a bit easier. Yep, there's that slide.
It's like they've done this before.
Yeah, we've done it just a few times. We're now standing by for
E lembrando mais uma
egress
vez, né, que agora a
CREW-6
SpaceX,
team.
né, então vai estar realizando as suas transmissões
Very
na
happy
sua
to
própria
see
plataforma,
Steve,
o X.
Woody, Andrey and Sultan
Mas aqui
back
então vocês
on planet
acompanham
Earth.
tudo ao vivo aqui
I'm sure
também.
they are also excited to come out, and as you mentioned, it's after the medical checks, they'll hop in the helicopter and go home, a quick ride. So I bet they're all getting really excited for the opportunity to see their families really soon.
And of course, the change of gravity from microgravity to 1G can be taxing on the body. So throughout that whole
Estamos
process,
aguardando
medical
então
checks,
o
the
ingresso da
helicopter ride,
tripulação no
plane
barco de
ride,
resgate.
the crew will have
Estamos
facilities
aguardando quem será o
will have the
primeiro
ability to
a sair.
rest through much of that journey. As of course, this has been a taxing journey for them, and they'll have well-deserved rest along their journey back home to Houston.
varies mission to mission, crew by crew, but we usually see either
Lembrando
the
que
pilot
hoje,
or the
né? Então
commander
depois, mais tarde,
egress first.
colocarei então nas nossas
So
redes
this seat
sociais
here,
a
Commander
programação
Steve
desta
Bowen is
semana.
in that left seat, and Pilot Woody Hoburg is in the seat on the right. To Woody's right is Andrey Fedyaev, and to Steve's left is Sultan Alneyadi. So usually it makes it easier if the center seats are vacated prior to the 2 mission specialist seats, but it really varies crew to crew. We did see them detach and remove the footrests from all 4 seats to also help add a bit more moving room within the interior of the capsule.
There's a series of checks, so it's not as easy as just unbuckling and getting out of your seat. The seats, of course, and suits are designed with human spaceflight in mind. So the seats are connected. The suits are connected to the seats via umbilical that can provide communications as well as air, nitrox purge that the crew is able to breathe. It's a little bit more oxygen than your standard breathing air. And so there is some technical specifics to get them egressed. So it is quite a process. So we're just standing by for them to get out of their seats. Does look like Steve will be the first out.
Nesse momento, às 2h09 no horário de Brasília, estamos vendo a saída do comandante Steve Bowen. E aí, portanto, está ele, o Steve Bowen, o primeiro a deixar a cápsula Dragon. Às 2h10 no horário de Brasília.
Helped up by the recovery teams.
Now being seated in a rolling chair to help move him back to the medical bay, where he will get a quick checkout with the flight surgeon.
And again, this is standard procedure.
We can see some applause happening on deck.
Agora, o segundo a sair será o piloto Hoburg. Então, nesse momento está ele.
For those of you that have just joined us, we are now standing by for egress of the remaining 3 CREW-6 members. We can now see Woody Hoburg making his way, pilot of CREW-6.
Então, nesse momento, às 2h11, o nosso piloto Warren Hoburg deixa aí a Crew
Remaining
Dragon.
inside our mission specialists, Sultan Alneyadi and Andrey Fedyaev. Commander Steve Bowen has already egressed. Some more applause there on the deck of the recovery vessel.
O próximo, então, a deixar a cápsula Dragon será o primeiro especialista da missão, o Sultan Alneyadi, aí do Emirados Árabes.
12:17 a.m. Eastern. So just under an hour ago, they made contact with the ocean surface, and here we see them now egressing and beginning the last steps before being able to make their way home.
That's right. The 2 NASA astronauts have exited the Dragon spacecraft and are now in the medical facilities as part of the standard procedures and checks necessary before they board the helicopters and take the flight back to shore. Of course, there are the two mission specialists left in the capsule. If they follow standard procedure, it should be Andrey Fedyaev that we see egress the capsule next.
Gary, you mentioned standard procedure. I think that's an important thing to note, that in addition to the teams rehearsing both joint operations, everywhere from pre-flight training to the things that they were doing in space to the things that they were monitoring while Dragon was on orbit and making its way home, everything is very carefully choreographed in terms of the process in which we execute these operations. So even from a recovery standpoint, you mentioned before that our recovery times from the first time we did this with humans on Demo 2, again using this same capsule. This capsule has flown 4 times now. Our operations have gotten more efficient, and they are documented step by step. And so, of course, whenever it comes to egress, there is a little bit of flexibility that if a crew member needs or wants to egress sooner than later, we can do that. But generally, as I mentioned before, we do try to vacate the 2 center seats first. We can now see 2 more leg rests being removed footrests being removed from the seats inside the capsule, again, just to create a little bit more room.
Yeah, you mentioned the efficiencies, Kate. We're inside of an hour now, and this is from the moment of splashdown at 12:17 p.m. Eastern. It's now 1:14, or 12:17 a.m. Eastern, rather. So it's now 1:14 a.m. Eastern, and we're
E aí,
seeing the
portanto,
third crew member
às
egress. So we're just an hour, really, after
2h15 da manhã, no horário de Brasília, nos deixa então a cápsula Dragon, o primeiro especialista da missão, o Sultan Alneyadi, aí dos Emirados Árabes Unidos. Então tá aí o Sultan. Não, esse aí é o cosmonauta. Não, esse aí é o cosmonauta Andrey Fedyaev. Às 2h15, então ele deixa a cápsula Dragon.
Positioned over to the medical facilities. Last remaining crew member inside Dragon Endeavour now is Emirati astronaut Sultan
Então esse daí é o especialista da missão, Andrey Fedyaev.
Got some happy waves there from Andrey. More applause. And the last footrest being detached from Sultan Alneyadi's chair.
You see Spacex and Emirati recovery personnel positioned outside the Dragon capsule, ready to receive Sultan Alneyadi. Again, he is the last remaining crew member inside Dragon Endeavour.
E aí, portanto, agora sim, às 2h17, estamos aí com a saída do segundo especialista da missão, a saída do Sultan Alneyadi. Então, após 1 hora do Splashdown, então temos a saída então, de toda a tripulação realizada com sucesso. Então, portanto, está ele aí, o nosso Sultan Alneyadi.
And just like that, the fourth crew
E aí
member,
está ele.
1 hour exactly on the nose since splashdown.
Então,
has
após
now
1
egressed
hora
from
do splashdown,
Dragon
toda a
Endeavour.
tripulação está sã e salva resgatada
Like
no barco.
smiles and waves and
Então, com
applause
essas
all
imagens, estamos
Alright,
aqui
all
então
4 crew
encerrando
members have egressed,
a nossa
Dragon
transmissão de
successfully.
hoje. Então, quero agradecer mais uma vez a audiência e a paciência de vocês. Nos vemos numa próxima oportunidade. Lembrando sempre de seguir as nossas redes sociais e de sempre acompanhar nós aqui no YouTube. Desejo a todos um ótimo dia. Daqui a pouco, então, iremos colocar aí os melhores momentos. Por hora eu fui. Muito obrigado. E encerra-se assim mais uma transmissão aqui no nosso canal UPTV.